Hey friends, tonight we begin with how Native Americans spent their nights. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe only if you truly enjoy this kind of slow, calming storytelling. Your support means the world and helps me keep creating peaceful spaces like this one. Tell me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing how this little quiet corner of the internet brings together people from all over the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan or some soft background, and let's gently into tonight's journey together. The night was never simply the absence of day. For the native peoples of North America, night carried its own rhythm, its own voice, its own sacred power. When the sun dipped low and the western sky bled into bands of gold, rose, and violet, life began to shift. The daytime labors of hunting, gathering, farming, or trading gave way to the slower, softer cadence of evening. Children, still buzzing with energy, darted between the fire pits or the shadow of the lodges, while elders prepared for the hours of quiet, storytelling, and watchfulness that the darkness demanded. Imagine stepping into the heart of a village, on the edge of dusk. Perhaps it is a cluster of lodges on the Great Plains, their poles rising like ribs against the fading horizon. Or perhaps it is a pueblo carved into the stone cliffs of the southwest, its adobe walls catching the last blush of sunlight. Or it may be a longhouse deep in the woodlands, where smoke curls through a vent in the roof and the air already smells of roasted corn. In each place, the patterns of night were different, yet there was a shared sense of rhythm, as if every community across the land understood that the coming of darkness was not an ending but the beginning of another chapter in the day. For many, tribes' night was inseparable from the fire. Fire was warmth, light, protection, and spirit. The flames reached upward like a bridge between the human and the divine, carrying prayers skyward and drawing people inward into a circle. After sunset, families and neighbors gathered around their fires. Men might mend tools or repair boughs, scraping sinew and smoothing shafts by firelight. Women often worked with their hands, weaving baskets or sewing hides with bone needles, their fingers quick and sure despite the dim glow. Children nestled close to their mothers or sprawled in the grass, lulled by the hum of voices and the crackle of burning wood. The soundscape of night was as rich as the daytime bustle. In the forests, cicadas and crickets sang their endless songs, blending with the occasional hoot of an owl or the distant call of wolves. In the desert, the air grew cool and silent, broken only by the chirp of insects and the scurry of small nocturnal animals. By the shores of rivers and lakes, frogs croaked, in harmony, a chorus rising into the dark. For the people who lived close to the land, these were not background noises, but signals, part of the language of the earth. Every sound had meaning. An owl could be an omen, a coyote's howl might carry a warning, and a whisper of wind in the trees could be a reminder of spirits nearby. But night was not only for listening, it was a time for speaking. Storytelling was the heartbeat of evening life. Across countless tribes, the telling of stories was sacred, and many tales were reserved only for the nighttime. To speak of certain spirits, heroes, or tricksters during the day was considered disrespectful or even dangerous, but under the cover of darkness, the words came alive. Imagine sitting at the edge of the firelight, eyes wide as an elder leans forward, his face glowing in orange and shadow. He tells of how the stars came to be, how animals learned to speak, how trickster figures like Coyote, Raven, or Nanabozo shaped the world through both cleverness and foolishness. Children listened, laughing at the mischief, gasping at the dangers, and whispering to one another as the tales sank into their memories. These stories were not merely entertainment. They carried lessons, warnings, and echoes of the tribe's worldview. The night sky itself was a vast book. Generations of native peoples read the stars the way one might read a story etched in ink. Constellations were not random but filled with meaning. Among the Lakota, the stars told of the sacred connection between the heavens and the people, mirroring the shape of their earth lodges and camps. For the Navajo, the stars formed patterns of heroes, monsters, and spirits who guided life. Far to the north, the Inuit gazed at the aurora borealis and saw the dance of spirits, ancestors playing games. In the sky, night was not a curtain that fell over the earth, but an opening into realms of mystery, reminding everyone of their place in a universe alive with presence. Night was also a time of ceremony. Depending on the season and the need, dancers might continue long after the sun's descent. The steady beat of drums carried into the night air, echoing through the forests or across the plains. Feathers, shells, and painted faces glowed in firelight as dancers moved in rhythm, their shadows leaping against the ground. These ceremonies honored the spirits, marked harvests, prepared for hunts, or healed the sick. To participate was to feel part of a greater circle, where even the darkness became sacred. Yet the night was not always gentle. For those who lived in times of conflict, it carried its dangers. Warriors might slip silently from the village, their moccasins soundless, against the earth, vanishing into the darkness to scout or raid. Families left behind kept watch, knowing that danger could also come under cover of night. Fires were sometimes banked low to avoid drawing attention. Dogs pricked their ears and lifted their heads at the faintest noise. Night sharpened the senses, demanding both caution and courage. Still, for many, the nights were woven with deep intimacy and connection. Families drew close in their lodges or longhouses, lying beneath furs or blankets, the steady breathing of loved ones lulling them into dreams. Parents told their children not only the great myths, but also smaller stories for family of memory, of lessons learned in daily life. A grandmother might hum a lullaby, her voice low and steady, while her grandson drifted into sleep with the smell of smoke in his hair. Lovers might whisper in the shadows, speaking words only the stars could. Here dreams themselves carried importance. Among many tribes, dreams were messages from the spirits, glimpses into realms beyond the ordinary. A young person might wake from a vivid dream and take it to an elder who would help interpret its meaning. Was it a call to a vision quest, a warning of illness or misfortune, or a gift of guidance? Dreams shaped choices, gave direction, and confirmed the unseen threads that bound the people to their world. The night was thus not only a time of rest, but a time of journeying inward and outward. Through the mysterious paths of dreams, the rhythm of the night often mirrored the seasons. In summer, evenings stretched long, filled with laughter, games, and gatherings that spilled into the cool hours. In winter, the nights were long and heavy, and families spent much of them indoors, huddled together against the cold. Winter nights were storytelling nights, when tales unfolded like great tapestries and children grew familiar with the heroes and tricksters of their people. In the snowbound silence, the crack of a log in the fire or the sigh of wind through the cracks of the lodge seemed louder, weightier, like the voice of the earth itself. The intimacy of night was not confined to the human world. Animals were constant companions, and their patterns shaped the lives of the people. Dogs curled close to the fires, keeping watch. Horses shifted restlessly in corrals or meadows, snorting into the dark. The howl of wolves or the screech of owls reminded everyone that they shared the night with other beings who were not merely animals, but relatives in the great web of life. Many believed that the boundary between human and spirit, between the seen and unseen, was thinner at night, and so respect and caution were always observed, and always, above it all, the stars shone. To look at the sky on a clear night was to see eternity stretch out in every direction. In those lights, tiny yet immense, lay stories of creation, paths for travelers, signs for farmers, and comfort for dreamers. Children fell asleep under those skies, their last sight the slow wheel of constellations. Elders, awake and watchful, saw in them reminders of ancestors and guides. Night was a time of rest, but it was never empty. It was alive, and in that aliveness the people found belonging. As the fire burned lower, casting long shadows that danced across the faces gathered around it, the night revealed yet another layer of meaning. For native communities, the hours after sunset were never wasted. They were times of work, times of quiet reflection, and times of sacred practice. A village might appear still to an outsider, its sounds hushed, its movements subdued. But in truth, the night was alive with the unhurried energy of tasks and rituals that could not be done while the sun blazed overhead. One of the most enduring images of night in native life was the glow of embers inside the lodge or longhouse. In the Great Lakes region, within the long, narrow wooden homes of the Iroquois and related nations, the interior might remain warm with a series of central fires that glowed all through the night. Families arranged themselves along the sides, each with its allotted space, furs spread upon wooden platforms, cooking pots hanging near the heat. Even as the people drifted into sleep, the fire was never permitted to go out. It symbolized not only physical warmth, but continuity, a presence that tied the living to ancestors and spirits. In the southwest, among the Pueblo peoples, night fell heavily upon adobe villages, their walls holding the day's warmth long into the evening. Families gathered in kiva ceremonial chambers, often built underground to conduct sacred rites. These spaces, lit by torchlight, resonated with chanting and the steady beat of drums, sounds that traveled up through the roof opening and into the quiet desert night. Such gatherings often lasted hours, with prayers rising for rain, fertility, or harmony offered to the spirits who moved freely in the darkness. The sense of night as a bridge between the visible and the invisible world was deeply felt, and the act of ceremony was a way of walking that bridge together. Farther north, on the plains, the Tipis of Lakota and Cheyenne families stood against the starlit expanse like small constellations themselves, each with a fire at its center. Inside, the flicker of flames painted designs on the hides, many of which told stories of battles, hunts, or visions. Children fell asleep beneath those painted histories, their eyes wandering over symbols that glowed faintly in the firelight. In these moments, history was not written in books, but breathed in the living space, teaching silently as night passed on. For many tribes, the hours after sundown were an opportunity for artisanship. The day's labor might have been dominated by farming or hunting, but in the quiet of night, creative work came alive. Men carved pipes or fashioned arrowheads from flint, the rhythmic tapping of stone on stone echoing softly. Women wove intricate patterns into blankets, dyed fibers with natural pigments, or decorated clothing with beads and quills. In these activities, time seemed to stretch, unhurried, each gesture a connection to tradition. A young girl might sit beside her grandmother, learning the patient, careful threading of porcupine quills onto a leather strip. A boy might watch his father sand a wooden bow, the sound of scraping blending with the distant night calls. In these ways, skills passed through the generations, preserved not by classrooms but by the fireside. Songs, too, belonged to the night. Without the distraction of daylight work, music could rise, unhurried and unbroken. Some songs were gentle lullabies to ease children into sleep. Others were prayer songs, accompanied by the beat of a small hand drum or the rattle of gourds filled with seeds. Songs remembered the past, honored the spirits, and marked the rhythm of the universe. They were not merely sounds, but vessels of memory. A melody sung at night might echo 100 years of tradition, carrying the voice of ancestors into the present. The act of singing bound people together, for even those who only listened still carried the song in their hearts. And then there was the sky, always the sky. No matter the region, the people's relationship with the heavens shaped how they experienced the night. The stars were navigators for those who traveled, storytellers for those who gathered, and timekeepers for those who marked the passage of seasons. In the woodlands, a hunter might glance upward at Orion to gauge the time of winter's depth. On the plains, a mother might tell her child about the Pleiades, those tiny clustered lights that signaled the length of the cold months. In the desert, the vast Milky Way stretched overhead, a white river of stars, believed by some to be the path of spirits traveling across the sky. The night was a classroom, a temple, a map, and no people who lived so closely with the land could ever look upon it casually. Night also brought with it certain responsibilities. In every community, watchfulness was essential. While many slept, a few kept awake. Guards might patrol the edges of camp, eyes trained to the horizon, ears attuned to every rustle of grass or crack of twig. Dogs, ever loyal, were quick to sense the presence of strangers or animals and gave their warning with low growls or sharp barks. The safety of the entire community often depended upon such vigilance. The stillness of night was beautiful, but it could also conceal danger, and so it was never taken for granted. But for the majority, the night meant a kind of gentle retreat into the world of dreams. To close one's eyes was not simply to rest. It was to open oneself to visions and messages. Dreams were often discussed in the morning as seriously as one might discuss a plan for the day. If a young man dreamed of an eagle, it might be taken as a sign of strength, calling him toward a vision quest. If a woman dreamed of water overflowing its banks, it might suggest coming abundance or, perhaps, warning. Elders, experienced in the interpretation of dreams, listened carefully and gave counsel. The dream world was as real as the waking one, and night was its doorway. Seasonal cycles further shaped how night was lived. During summer, nights could be times of communal joy. Children played long after sunset, their laughter ringing through the air as fireflies lit up the grasslands like wandering sparks. Games continued by firelight, dances carried on beneath the stars, and the cool night air offered relief from the day's heat. In contrast, winter nights carried a slower, heavier rhythm. In snowbound villages, the cold pushed families indoors, clustering around fires for warmth. Storytelling dominated these nights, not just because it entertained, but because it was tradition. Many tales, particularly sacred ones, were told only when snow lay on the ground. Winter nights thus became libraries of oral history, preserving myth, genealogy, and teaching. In some tribes, winter counts painted or drawn records of significant yearly events were created or updated during these nights. By firelight, a designated keeper would mark the story of the year on a buffalo hide, ensuring that generations yet to come would know of battles fought, hunts won, storms endured, or great gatherings celebrated. Thus, in the heart of darkness, history itself was safeguarded, and always the night was communal. No one lived in isolation, and the togetherness of night emphasized this truth. Families huddled close. Neighbors heard each other's laughter or songs drifting from nearby fires. Children from one household might fall asleep in another, welcomed without hesitation. The boundaries of individual dwellings softened in the darkness, replaced by the sense of one people bound together under the same sky. Night was intimate. Yes, but it was also expansive, reminding each person that they were a strand in a greater web of life, tied to one another and to the spirits above and below. Even as sleep eventually claimed most of the village, the world remained alive. Fires crackled, embers glowed, dogs stirred. The wind whispered through trees or across grass, and the stars wheeled silently above. The earth never ceased, and neither did the spirits who walked through the night. To the people who lived close, to that rhythm, the night was never empty silence, but a living presence, one to be honored and embraced, never feared. The deeper hours of night carried their own character. When the first watch of evening had passed and the camp had settled into slumber, there was a silence unlike any other. It was not the silence of absence, but the kind that vibrated with presence. Presence of earth, of sky, of unseen watchers. Many believed that spirits moved more freely when the world grew quiet. The dead, the ancestors, the animal spirits, and the forces of the land were thought to stir, passing unseen among the sleeping, lodges, or through the forests and plains beyond. For this reason, it was not uncommon for a shaman or healer to remain awake, listening, attuned to messages carried in the stillness. Such figures often sat apart, perhaps at the edge of a fire's glow, wrapped in robes or blankets, their gaze lifted skyward or turned inward in meditation. Dreams were one doorway to visions, but wakefulness in the deepest part of night was another. The sound of an owl's call, the sudden hush of wind, the crack of ice on a winter river, these could be interpreted as signs, woven into meaning for the people. A shaman might rise at such moments to chant quietly, to sprinkle tobacco on the ground in offering, or to stir the embers of the fire with a deliberate hand, honoring the presence of what was unseen. In the lives of hunters and warriors, the night also carried practical weight. Travel by night was sometimes necessary, whether to stalk game in silence or to avoid detection when approaching a rival camp. Moving through forests or plains in darkness required deep familiarity with the land, the curve of a hill, the feel of soil underfoot, the smell of water carried on air. These were guides as much as the stars. Warriors on the move often painted their faces dark, blending with shadows, their bodies moving in harmony with the rhythm of night itself. While most of the community rested, a few experienced eyes remained open, reading every flicker of starlight and every murmur of the world around them. In coastal regions, particularly among tribes of the Pacific Northwest, night was bound to the sea. Canoes rested, pulled onto beaches, their prows pointed toward the water like sleeping animals, and families gathered in plank houses lit by the glow of central fires. Outside, the tides shifted and the surf boomed against rocky shores, a constant voice in the darkness. Some fishing work extended into night, with torches carried on canoes to draw fish closer. Their flames reflected on the black surface of the water. These shimmering lights at sea were a sight both practical and haunting. Dots of fire drifting across the waves under a canopy of stars. Among nomadic groups, particularly in the wide expanses of the plains, night was also a time to move herds of horses to safe enclosures or to guard them from predators. The rhythmic sound of hooves, the soft snorting of animals, and the occasional whinny echoed through camps as young men carried out the watch. For those who guarded, the hours were long, but the bond with the animals was strengthened. Horses were precious companions, vital to hunting, travel, and warfare, and their safety was intertwined with the well-being of the people themselves. The idea of community extended even into how people positioned themselves in sleep. Families shared proximity, their sleeping platforms lined one after another, separated only by wooden partitions or personal belongings. In Sleepless, the fire's central warmth meant that bodies were arranged in a circle, each person's feet pointing toward the flames, symbolizing shared dependence on the same heart of light. Such arrangements reinforced a sense of belonging, that each individual was but one thread in the greater weave of the group. Even in unconsciousness, the structure of togetherness endured. Yet the night was never entirely predictable. Storms could sweep in suddenly, transforming the calm of darkness into a roar of wind and rain. Lightning might split the sky, illuminating the camp in blinding flashes, followed by the crack of thunder rolling across hills and plains. These moments were powerful, often interpreted as the voice of spirits or the display of forces greater than human comprehension. Children clutched at their mothers, fires hissed under the onslaught of rain, and elders reminded the young that such tempests were part of the balance of life. In quieter times, snow blanketed camps in muffled silence, its weight softening every sound, until the only noise was the crackle of firewood or the soft breathing of sleepers. The passage of night was also measured by ritual. Some tribes marked midnight with specific prayers or songs, acknowledging the moment when darkness reached its deepest point. Others used the movement of stars across the sky, noting when a familiar constellation reached the zenith or dipped toward the horizon. Time, in this sense, was not kept by numbers on a clock, but by the relationship between people and the cosmos above them. As dawn slowly approached, a subtle shift could be felt. The air grew cooler, the stars began to fade, and the eastern horizon brightened with the faintest suggestion of light. Birds stirred first, their songs puncturing the stillness, and dogs rose to stretch, sniffing the new day. Fires were rekindled, their smoke rising into the pale sky, and sleepers stirred under furs and blankets. The night's mysteries began to retreat, folding back into memory, while the responsibilities of daylight returned. Yet the hours of night had left their mark through stories told, songs sung, crafts shaped, visions dreamed, and bonds strengthened. For native peoples, the night was never wasted time, never a void to be endured until morning. It was a living part of existence, equal to the day, carrying its own tasks, lessons, and beauty. To step into night was to step into a sacred rhythm that touched the body, the spirit, the community, and the land all at once. And as the sun broke, over forests, plains, deserts, or coasts, the memory of the night lingered, woven quietly into the fabric of life, to be carried forward until darkness came again. In the final hours before dawn, the night often felt longest. The fires had burned low, embers glowing faintly in the center of lodges or teepees, and the air had grown cold. Sleep was lighter at this time, as if the body instinctively sensed the approach of day. Mothers shifted quietly, pulling blankets back over children who had rolled from their covers. Infants stirred, mewling softly before nestling back into warmth. The steady breathing of families created a rhythm that seemed to echo the heartbeat of the community itself. This was also the hour when hunters sometimes rose, leaving their bedding before the first hint of light touched the sky. To strike early was to gain advantage over game, catching deer, elk, or bison in the cool of morning as they foraged before the heat of sun. Men moved in silence, gathering bows, arrows, or spears, tying moccasins with practiced hands, their breath rising like smoke in the chill. Dogs padded after them, tails low, ears alert, part of a company that knew its role without command. The rest of the camp, wrapped in dreams, might never know that such figures had already disappeared into the grey shadows in woodland regions. This late part of night was when the sounds of nocturnal animals peaked. The rustle of raccoons foraging, the distant howl of wolves, the scream of a night bird all blended into an ever-changing backdrop. To modern ears, it might seem eerie, but to those who lived among it, these were familiar companions. Children learned early to distinguish a friendly sound from one that carried warning. The bark of foxes or the cry of owls caused little alarm, while a sudden silence, the kind that spread like a blanket across the trees, could signal danger of predator moving nearby, unseen yet deeply felt. Dreams played an important role in these quiet hours. Many believed that dreams in the deep night, closest to dawn, carried the strongest visions. Stories told of hunters who dreamed of animals and later encountered them in the waking world, or of shamans who received instruction from ancestors through dream. Upon waking, a dream might be recounted to family or even shared with a spiritual leader for interpretation. Dreams were never dismissed as random. They were part of a larger dialogue between the human spirit and the unseen realms. For those awake at this late hour, work could still continue. Women might tend to infants, warming them or nursing them under the cover of darkness. In longhouses, older children might help their mothers fetch wood or adjust fires. In coastal communities, men might already be mending nets, preparing for a day's fishing even before the first canoe touched water. These small, steady tasks were rarely noticed but held the rhythm of survival. Night was never idle, only differently filled. The constancy of the stars offered reassurance to all who looked upward in those final hours of darkness. The familiar shapes of constellations guided navigation, but they also offered comfort. A hunter returning late from the woods might look up to find orientation, while an elder rising to relieve himself might pause and breathe in the vast, silent sky. To those who lived without walls or clocks, the heavens were a calendar, a compass, and a reminder that life was part of something immeasurably larger. As the black of night began to soften toward grey, anticipation stirred. Smoke curled higher as fires were stoked again, the smell of wood mixing with the first sense of morning air. Families stretched awake slowly, their blankets falling away. Their voices still hushed in the liminal space between night and day. The rhythm of daily life was ready to resume. Hunters setting out, women preparing food, children tumbling outside to chase one another as the sun's warmth touched the earth. Yet in those last breaths of night, before dawn fully arrived, there lingered a quiet recognition that the hours just past had shaped the soul of the people. For native communities, the night was not separate from the day, but its equal counterpart. It carried responsibility, beauty, danger, and rest in equal measure. It was a time for memory and vision, for the tender care of family, for the sharpening of tools and skills, for the guidance of stars and the power of stories. The night was not empty, it was full of voices, both human and more than human, full of tasks that sustained life, full of silence that was not absence but presence. And when the first rays of light crowned the horizon, those hours passed into memory, but their influence remained, carried in the breath of the people as they stepped into another day. Thus ended a single night, rich and layered, among Native Americans long ago. And though centuries have passed, the rhythm of those nights remains within the memory of the land itself, echoes of fires that once glowed, of voices that once sang, of dreams that once shaped lives beneath the canopy of stars. When we turn from the intimate world of family and firelight to the broader sweep of community, we begin to see how night shaped the rhythms of society itself. The hours of darkness were not only personal, they were communal. Every village, every camp, every gathering of people had ways of living the night together, finding safety, meaning, and beauty in the shared stillness. Consider first the role of the night watch. In many tribes, particularly those who lived in open plains or along contested hunting grounds, someone was always awake. Warriors or young men might be chosen to keep guard while the rest of the village slept. Their silhouettes could be seen near the edges of campfires, standing quiet as stone eyes scanning the horizon. They listened for the faintest movement, the pad of an animal, the distant thunder of hooves, the whisper of grass stirred by more than wind. These sentinels did not only watch for enemies, they listened for the signs of change in weather, for the approach of herds, for the language of the night itself in woodland areas. The duties of watchfulness often fell to more than one person. Two men might take turns walking the perimeter of a longhouse community, moving like shadows among the trees. They carried spears, bows, or torches, not always to fight, but to announce presence, to let any creature know that humans were near and alert. The reassurance of their vigilance was felt by every sleeper, who could rest more soundly knowing that their people had not surrendered themselves entirely to vulnerability. But watchfulness was not always martial. Sometimes it was deeply spiritual. Shamans and healers often stayed awake in the heart of night, keeping fires alive, whispering prayers, or listening for visions. For them, darkness was not emptiness, was fullness, alive with spirits. They would drum softly or rattle pebbles in gourds, creating a rhythm that mimicked the heartbeat of the earth. Their role was not only to guard the body of the people, but to guard their souls, to stand as mediators between human beings and the unseen. Night dances and ceremonies, too, belonged to this realm. In some tribes, certain rituals could only be performed under the cover of darkness, when the stars themselves were witnesses. Imagine a circle of dancers moving around a fire, their shadows leaping high on animal hide lodges. The rhythm of drums echoing into the cool air. The fire illuminated painted faces, feathers, and beads, while beyond the circle the world was vast and black. Songs rose, steady and repetitive, hypnotic, meant to bridge the human and the divine. To watch from the outside was to see a community become more than itself, to feel it merge with the mystery of night. Children, too, were woven into these communal nights. Though often sent to bed early, they listened, wide-eyed, to the faint echoes of songs, the beat of drums, the laughter of adults around the fire. The muffled voices outside their shelters became part of their dreams. For them, night was a teacher, reminding them that they were part of something greater, that their family extended beyond the walls of the lodge to the whole community. In fishing villages, along coasts or rivers, the night shaped labor differently. Canoes pushed into dark water, their paddles barely rippling the surface as men went in search of fish or shellfish that could be more easily caught under moonlight. Torches burned at the tips of boats, their flames mirrored in water, attracting fish that darted toward light. Nets were spread with skill, and catches pulled in silence, broken only by the slap of water and the murmur of men coordinating in hushed voices. These night labors sustained the village, ensuring that when morning came, there would be food for all. Travel too often took place at night, in regions of open plains or deserts where heat could be unbearable during the day. Journeys were made beneath stars. A line of travelers' families, hunters, or traders moved by moonlight, guided by constellations known to them like familiar maps. The Big Dipper, the North Star, the path of the Milky Way. These were not abstract. They were companions, reliable guides through wilderness. The sound of feet or hooves moving over earth, the creak of leather straps, the soft call of a leaderall became part of a nocturnal caravan where silence was safety in communal houses, such as the great Iroquois longhouses. Night was a time when the closeness of kinship was most deeply felt. Fires along the central aisle glowed steadily, smoke curling upward through openings in the roof. Families slept in alcoves along the walls, their possessions stored nearby, their blankets drawn close. The murmur of voices drifted from one end of the longhouse to the other. Elders might tell stories late into the night, their words weaving through smoke and shadow, settling into the minds of both children and adults. The longhouse, alive with the breathing of dozens, became almost like a living being itself, holding its people safe within. In times of danger, nights could stretch endlessly. A raiding party suspected nearby meant every sound was amplified, every shadow questioned. In such hours, sleep was shallow, and families clung together, ears straining for the slightest sign. Warriors prepared weapons, sharpened blades, and positioned themselves near entryways. Women hushed children and banked fires low to hide the glow. Such nights could feel heavy, pressing down with the weight of uncertainty, yet they also revealed resilience. Communities survive not by denying fear, but by facing it together. Their unity stronger than the threats beyond. And yet, there were also nights of celebration when the air was alive with joy. Victories in hunting or battle, the changing of seasons, the return of travelers. Such moments brought feasting and laughter long after the sun had set. Fires burned high, food was shared, songs rolled like waves across the night. Children darted in and out of groups, chasing each other under the glow of sparks. Elders smiled, recalling their own youth in such revels. Even the dogs joined in, barking at the excitement, tails wagging. These nights carried a warmth that could linger in memory long after. Through all these different shapes of night, guarded, spiritual, laboring, fearful, joyful, we see that darkness was not a time when life paused. It was a continuation of life, as important as day, filled with its own tasks, dangers, and delights. The community lived the night together, every voice, every fire, every song joining in a chorus of survival and meaning. And as dawn approached once more, as stars dimmed and fires dwindled, the memory of the night, its dances, its silences, its work, its watchfulness was carried into the day, ready to be retold, remembered, and lived again when the sun once more slipped behind the horizon. As the fire's glow dimmed and the community's energy shifted, the role of storytelling deepened into something even more profound. It was not just entertainment. It was a way of binding the people together, especially during long nights when the cold pressed against the walls of lodges or longhouses. A story could fill the silence, carry the mind across landscapes, and weave generations together with words alone. The teller did not speak quickly. The cadence was slow, deliberate, each phrase given space to breathe. The listeners leaned in, some resting heads against arms or laps, their eyes tracing the flicker of flame as the tale unfolded. There were creation stories told in the hush of night, narratives that explained the origins of the world, the birth of rivers, the reason the stars glittered in particular shapes. Listeners knew these stories well, but repetition never dulled them. Instead, the retelling itself was ritual, a reminder that memory was sacred. In some tribes, the winter nights were considered the only proper time to tell such myths. The belief was that spirits, animals, or ancestral beings might be offended if their stories were spoken during other seasons. Thus, night after night, families waited through winter darkness, filling the hours with tales that belonged only to that season. Songs often intertwined with these narratives. The voice of the storyteller might rise into melody at certain points, shifting into chant, drawing listeners into rhythm. Drums, rattles, or even the simple beat of a hand on the earth might accompany the tale. Children would sway unconsciously, their tired bodies responding to sound, while adults closed their eyes and let the music bridge the gap between waking thought and dream. This blending of story and song created a texture to the night that was as memorable as any feast or dance. But storytelling was not always confined to firesides. On warm nights, people gathered beneath the open sky, letting the stars themselves become a canvas for tales. Elders pointed to constellations, naming them, telling how each had once been a great hunter, an animal, or a spirit. The dark patches of the Milky Way became pathways, rivers, or barriers between worlds. Children lay flat on their backs in the grass, eyes wide, memorizing the map overhead. For them, night became both infinite and personal, the sky no longer distant but familiar, a place inhabited by stories and beings they felt they almost knew. There were also teachings that came only in darkness. Night hunts or quiet journeys under moonlight gave elders the chance to instruct the young in skills of survival. A boy might learn to walk silently on leaf-strewn ground, placing each foot with care while the elder demonstrated. A girl might be shown how to read the glimmer of water under faint starlight, recognizing a stream from its subtle reflection. These lessons were not lectures. They were whispered instructions, lived experience shared in real time, often without words. The pupil listened with every sense, learning not through explanation, but through immersion in the night itself. Dreams, too, were not seen as private or meaningless. Among many native peoples, dreams carried weight, sometimes considered messages from spirits or ancestors. After waking, a dream might be shared with family or even with the community, depending on its importance. Elders interpreted these visions, discerning guidance or warnings. A dream of an animal might signify a coming hunt, a dream of water a sign of abundance or danger. Thus, the night extended beyond waking hours. It shaped lives through the visions. It delivered, for some, sleep itself became a sacred act, a doorway to knowledge. In certain communities, particularly those of the plains, Vision quests often began with nights spent alone in nature. A youth would separate from the village, climbing hills or finding secluded spaces, remaining without food or fire, waiting through nights of solitude for a vision. The stars overhead, the cries of coyotes, the rustle of wind through grass all became companions and challengers. Fear tested resolve, and endurance tested spirit. When the vision came, whether in waking dream or sleep, it was carried back to the people, shaping the individual's role in the community. These nights of solitude were milestones, remembered for a lifetime. The communal life of night also included quieter labors, often overlooked but essential. Women might continue sewing or repairing clothing by firelight, their needles flashing briefly as they passed through hide or cloth. Men might carve tools or weapons, sharpening edges, shaping wood, fitting arrowheads. These tasks, performed in rhythm with conversation or silence, gave night a productive hum. Children watched, learning not only technique but patience. Slow, careful work that built survival piece by piece. The ordinary mingled with the sacred. Even the smallest labor could be an offering to continuity. Night also offered a unique relationship with animals. The howl of wolves in the distance was not only a sound of the wild, but also a voice in dialogue with human life. The call of owls, the scurry of small creatures in the underbrush, the splash of fish in a river roar. These sounds painted the nocturnal world. Many tribes interpreted these voices as omens, messages, or teachings. An owl's cry might be a warning, a coyote's laugh a trickster's reminder. Thus, to lie awake at night was not merely to hear noise, but to listen to meaning. To exist within a web of communication where humans were never alone. And in the midst of all this, the watchfulness, the work, the stories, the visions, there was intimacy. Families huddled together against the cold, bodies pressed close for warmth. Parents whispered softly to children, soothing them to sleep with gentle words. Lovers found quiet corners or moments beneath the stars, speaking in low tones, sharing laughter that belonged only to them. The night, though communal, also offered privacy. Shadows gave cover, firelight revealed only what it touched, leaving the rest to imagination and secrecy. Night was therefore never just the absence of day. It was its own realm, thick with presence, activity, and feeling. It was a time when a community revealed itself, not in work of harvest or hunt, but in closeness, in care, in the weaving together of voices, songs, dreams, and silence. When dawn finally edged across the horizon, those who had guarded, sung, labored, or dreamed carried with them the imprint of the night just past, ready to begin the cycle again. The night often unfolded in layers, each one revealing a different rhythm of life. When the first tasks and conversations slowed, when stories were told and laughter softened into silence, the sacred practices of the evening began to emerge. For many native communities, the hours after dusk were not merely pauses between days. They were bridges into the spiritual world. Fires that had burned for warmth and light became altars of sorts, their smoke rising like prayers into the sky. The people understood that darkness was not emptiness, but fullness, alive with unseen beings, with spirits and forces that guided and watched over the living. Ceremonies frequently took place under the cloak of night. The absence of the sun made the presence of the unseen more palpable, and the glow of moon and stars added their own silent blessing. In some regions, dances continued long after daylight had ended, the pounding of drums echoing into the cool air. Feet struck the earth in steady rhythm, each step affirming the bond between people and land. Shadows of dancers stretched and swayed across the firelit ground, creating ghost-like figures that seemed to blur the line between the human and the spiritual. To be present in such a circle at night was to feel both grounded and lifted, as if one's body remained on earth, but one's spirit drifted upward with the sparks of the fire. The songs sung during these ceremonies carried deep power. They were not casual tunes, but prayers in melody, offerings made audible. Each beat of the drum mirrored a heartbeat, a reminder of the living connection between all beings. Sometimes, chants would rise together in unison, the voices of men and women merging into one powerful current that surged into the night. Other times, a lone singer would lead, his or her voice high and piercing, carrying across the open space with haunting clarity. These sounds belonged to the night, carrying their resonance further than the ear could follow, out toward the spirits who were listening. Nighttime also held the ritual of healing. Fireside gatherings were moments when medicine people worked, with herbs, chants, and touch, tending to those in need. The darkness outside gave the work a certain seclusion, a protected sphere where healing could unfold undisturbed. Patients lay close to the fire, breathing in the scent of sage, cedar, or sweetgrass as healers moved around them, whispering prayers, invoking powers greater than themselves. For those gathered nearby, the healing was not only for the sick, but for the community itself, a renewal of balance and harmony. Watching the flicker of firelight on the healer's hands, listening to the murmured words, one felt the night itself participating in the act. There was also a sacred intimacy in prayer. At night, some sought solitude for it, slipping away from the group to kneel by water or stand beneath a tree. Alone with the sky, they raised their hearts and thoughts to the Creator, speaking softly or silently, trusting that the night carried their words further than daylight ever could. The quiet was part of the prayer, the darkness part of the offering. In this solitude, a person could feel the immensity of the world and the closeness of the divine all at once. The breath of wind through branches, the ripple of water, the hum of insects all became part of the response, signs that the prayer had been heard. Children often drifted to sleep during these long nights of song, dance, and ceremony there, dreams shaped by the rhythms surrounding them. A child might fall asleep with the echo of drums in their ears, the glow of fire still warming their eyelids. For them, the night became a cradle that rocked them gently into visions. Their dreams, in turn, became part of the community's life. For children were often asked in the morning what they had seen or felt while they slept. Even the youngest among them carried voices of insight, and their words were listened to with respect. The deeper hours of night, when most of the camp had finally quieted, were filled with a different kind of life. Hunters moved silently, sometimes setting out for nocturnal animals or preparing for hunts at dawn. Scouts kept watch at the edges of villages, their senses alert to every rustle and shift of the wind. These guardians were not simply on lookout for threats, but were part of the night's dialogue, attuned to the signals of the earth. A snapping twig, a shift in the pattern of animal calls, the smell of smoke drifting from a far wall, these carried meaning. To stay awake through the long hours required stamina, but also trust in the teachings passed down, that the night spoke, and one needed only to listen carefully. Within the lodges, the sleepers were not entirely still. A stir, a turn, a soft murmur. Night was a time of dreams, and dreams were alive. Some woke briefly, startled by visions, then lay awake, contemplating their meaning before drifting again into slumber. Others rose quietly to add wood to the fire, ensuring warmth continued. Until morning, the simple glow of embers was a comfort, a reminder that even in darkness there was always a spark of life. The camp never truly slept. It breathed, it shifted, it dreamed, a collective organism moving with the rhythm of the night. Sometimes, the most extraordinary moments of night were also the quietest. On clear evenings, when the moon shone full, the entire landscape gleamed in silver light. Rivers glistened, trees stretched their long shadows, and the ground itself seemed to glow faintly. Villagers stepped outside their lodges just to take in the beauty, to stand silently and feel themselves bathed in lunar radiance. Some sang softly to the moon, recognizing it as a companion, a guide, a being who marked the passage of time with patience. Others simply gazed upward, letting awe wash over them. The night sky too vast for words. Thus, night in Native American life was not a void, but a canvas, painted with ceremony, prayer, healing, work, and wonder. The hours unfolded like layers of story, each one deepening the connection between people, earth, and spirit. When dawn approached and the horizon began to brighten, it was not merely the end of darkness, but the conclusion of a sacred cycle. Those who had prayed, sung, danced, healed, or kept watch knew that they had been part of something larger than themselves, woven into the fabric of life that stretched endlessly backward to ancestors and endlessly forward to generations yet unborn. As the night deepened toward its quietest hours, when fires burned low and conversations faded into silence, another dimension of life unfolded, one often unseen but deeply felt. The world of dreams, visions, and ancestral presence became a thread that wove through the slumbering camp. Sleep was never just a physical necessity. It was a spiritual passage. To close one's eyes beneath the great sky was to enter a realm where the ancestors walked, where animals spoke, and where messages arrived from places unseen. Many native traditions regarded dreams not as illusions, but as truths revealed in symbolic form. A dream could carry guidance for an individual or for the entire community. It was not uncommon for a person to wake in the stillness of night, heart racing from a vision so vivid it demanded attention. They might slip outside their lodge, breathe in the cool night air, and gaze upward, silently thanking the spirits for sending a message. Some would keep such dreams to themselves, waiting for clarity, while others would share them at dawn with elders, whose wisdom helped interpret what had been shown. These night visions could shape decisions about hunts, journeys, or alliances. They could confirm a path or warn of danger ahead. For young people, dreams often marked turning points, guiding them toward adulthood, responsibility, or even spiritual callings. It was said that the spirits chose the night for such encounters, because the noise of the day was too loud, the bustle of life too distracting. Only when silence reigned could such voices be heard clearly. The deep hours were also when the ancestral presence was most strongly felt. Families believed their ancestors watched over them, walking invisibly among the lodges. The faint stirring of the wind through the grass, the soft whistle of an owl, or the flicker of embers could all signal that those who had gone before were near. The bond between the living and the departed was not one of distance, but of closeness woven through daily rituals and nightly reverence. To sleep at night was to rest in the presence of one's lineage, a comfort that brought both humility and strength. And yet, the night was never without its challenges. Danger lurked in the dark, both real and imagined. Predators sometimes prowled, Near villages, their glowing eyes briefly catching the firelight, wolves howled in the distance, their cries both beautiful and unsettling. Bears might wander too close, drawn by the scent of food. The people knew the night carried risks, but they also trusted in their vigilance and in the protection of spirits. Guards and scouts did not merely watch with their eyes, they listened with their whole beings, interpreting the subtle signs of the night. Children, half asleep within their lodges, would sometimes awaken to the distant call of animals or the crackle of firewood. To them, the night was a place of mystery, filled with sounds that carried both comfort and fear. Their parents reassured them, explaining the cause of the coyote, the hoot of the owl, the rustle of deer in the underbrush. In this way, children learned the language of the night, each sound a lesson, each shadow an invitation to see the world not as a threat, but as alive with meaning. Night was also a time of closeness among families. Within the warmth of lodges, people gathered together, lying side by side, the rhythm of breathing uniting them in sleep. The intimacy of shared rest strengthened bonds. Parents, feeling the weight of children nestled against them, grandparents, listening to the soft breaths of generations they had nurtured. The night cocooned them, wrapping the family in a sense of safety even amidst uncertainty. This togetherness was a quiet form of strength, a reminder that survival was never an individual act but a collective effort. Occasionally, night brought rare spectacles. The aurora, when it shimmered across northern skies, was regarded with awe and reverence. To witness the heavens ripple with green, red, and violet light was to glimpse the power of forces beyond human comprehension. Some believed the lights were spirits dancing, others that they were messages sent across the sky. Villagers would fall into hushed silence beneath their glow, each person aware they were part of something vast and sacred. Even those who did not fully understand the phenomenon knew it carried meaning. And so they watched with reverence until the lights faded into the darkness. There were nights of storms too, when thunder rolled like drums of the sky and lightning split the heavens open. In those moments, the people did not cower but listened, for thunder and lightning were voices of powerful beings. The storm was a reminder of nature's authority, of the balance between humans and the elements. Inside lodges, families huddled together, not in fear, but in recognition that they were witnesses to a conversation far greater than themselves. The smell of rain, the sound of it striking earth and hide, became part of the night's symphony. For those who remained awake through the long watches, the most magical moment was often the transition before dawn. The stars, after gleaming for hours, began to fade one by one, as if retreating to make way for another cycle of light. The horizon shifted slowly, from black to deep blue, then to soft gray. Birds stirred, their first tentative calls breaking the silence. Smoke rose from early fires, and the camp stretched into wakefulness. This liminal time, neither night nor day, carried a sacred quality. It was the passing of a torch, the renewal of the covenant between people, earth, and sky. By the time the sun finally crested the horizon, painting the land in warmth, the night had already fulfilled its purpose. It had sheltered dreams, hosted ceremonies, tested vigilance, and offered moments of awe. For the native peoples, the night was never wasted time, never something to be endured until morning. It was a vital part of the cycle of existence, a time to connect with forces unseen, to draw strength from ancestors, and to witness the beauty of the world in its quietest form. And as each new dawn arrived, it carried with it the memory of the night before songs still echoing faintly, prayers still lingering in the air, dreams still shaping the choices of the day to come. The night, in all its layers, was as much a teacher as the sunlit hours. To live fully was to honor both, to walk through the cycles of light and dark with gratitude, humility, and an ever-deepening sense of belonging to the world. As night descended across the vast landscapes of North America, the rhythm of life unfolded differently depending on the region. For the people of the Great Plains, the Southwest deserts, the eastern woodlands, and the frozen Arctic, the darkness brought with it distinct traditions, sounds, and rituals shaped by geography and the unique spirits of each place. While the cycle of night united all native peoples, the ways it was lived, celebrated, and endured revealed the diversity of cultures that thrived across the continent. On the Great Plains, the night stretched across a boundless horizon, an ocean of grasses rippling beneath the stars. Villages of tipis formed circles around central fires, their hides glowing amber in the flickering light. When the sun dipped below the horizon, hunters and scouts returned from their journeys, welcomed by the warmth of communal gathering. Families settled within their lodges, arranging bedding made of buffalo robes, furs, and woven mats. But for the plains people, night was more than a time of rest. It was when the sky itself became a living presence. The stars were not distant points of light. They were beings, relatives, and storytellers. Constellations carried the memories of ancestors, mapped the cycles of the buffalo, and guided journeys across the endless grasslands. Elders would point upward, tracing the patterns with their fingers, teaching children how to read the sky. The Milky Way was often described as a spirit road, a shimmering pathway where souls traveled after leaving this world. To lie back against the cool earth, wrapped in a buffalo hide, and gaze upward at the heavens was to feel both small and connected. A single thread woven into the great fabric of existence. In the quiet of plains nights, the drums sometimes echoed their steady beats. Carrying across the prairie, ceremonies often continued long after darkness fell, lit by firelight and accompanied by the haunting call of voices rising into the night air. Songs were not merely performances. They were prayers, invocations, and offerings. Some dances continued until dawn, the circle of movement echoing the circle of stars above. For the plains people, night was not only rest but renewal, a time when communal spirit was strengthened beneath the canopy of the sky. Far to the southwest, in the deserts and mesas, the night carried a different flavor. Here, the heat of the sun made the cool of evening precious, a time when the land finally exhaled its warmth and people could move more freely. Pueblo villages, with their stacked adobe homes, glowed softly under the moonlight, their outlines sharp against the starlit desert. Fires burned in courtyards, and families gathered for meals that often stretched into the evening. The desert night was alive with the chirping of crickets, the distant howl of coyotes, the soft rustle of wind through sagebrush. In this arid world, the night was sacred for its silence and clarity. The stars blazed more fiercely here than in almost any other place, their light unhindered by clouds or moisture. The desert sky was a vast dome, so bright that it seemed the earth itself was lifted upward toward the heavens. Among the Pueblo and other southwestern peoples, storytelling was often reserved for such nights. Legends of trickster figures, spirits of the land, and creation tales were told in soft voices, weaving the people into their cosmic and earthly origins. Ceremonies, too, found their rhythm in the desert night. The sound of rattles, flutes, and chants filled the air, echoing off canyon walls and mesas. Some rituals honored the spirits of rain and fertility, essential in such a dry land. Others were healing ceremonies, where shamans invoked the power of spirits to restore balance to the sick or troubled. The night offered both cover and quiet for such work. The spirits more easily reached in the absence of sunlight's distractions. Meanwhile, in the dense forests and river valleys of the eastern woodlands, nights unfolded with an entirely different tone. Villages were tucked beneath towering trees, where the canopy created a world of shadows and muffled sounds. The air was heavy with the scent of earth, leaves, and wood smoke. Fires flickered in wigwams and longhouses, their glow spilling into the dark forest. Here, night was a time for gathering and storytelling, but also for vigilance. The forests were home to countless creatures: deer, bears, wolves, owls whose movements were never far away. The eastern tribes often carried a deep reverence for the spirits of animals, and the night amplified this relationship. The call of the owl was listened to carefully, sometimes feared as a harbinger of death, sometimes respected as the voice of wisdom. Wolves howled in the distance, their presence both respected and cautious. Around the fire, elders told stories of how animals taught humans to live, how the world had been shaped through their sacrifices and lessons. The children, tucked against their mothers or grandmothers, listened wide-eyed, their imaginations painting the forest in shades of myth and meaning. For many eastern woodland communities, dreams were a central part of the night experience. Families often discussed their dreams in the morning, interpreting them as signs from the spirit world. Night was a time when the boundary between waking and spirit life thinned, when ancestors might whisper truths, or animals might reveal themselves. As guides, to sleep in these forests was to rest not in isolation, but in the embrace of a world alive with presence. And in the far north, across the icy expanse of the Arctic, night was a realm unlike any other. Here, the cold was a constant companion, and survival depended on the warmth of family and fire. Inside igloos or sod houses, Inuit families gathered tightly, sharing body heat as much as they shared stories. The howling wind outside was relentless, rattling structures and sweeping across the tundra. Yet inside, the glow of seal oil lamps bathed faces in golden light, their flicker casting shadows on walls of ice and snow. For the Inuit and other northern peoples, the night could stretch for months in the long winters. In such times, the world outside was shrouded in endless darkness, broken only by the shifting dance of the aurora borealis. The northern lights painted the sky in rippling curtains of green and red, and stories abounded about their meaning. Some said they were the spirits of ancestors playing games. Others believed they were signals from beings in the sky. To step outside and watch the aurora was to feel humbled by the beauty of a world so harsh, yet so magnificent. In these frozen lands, song and story were lifelines, carrying culture through the endless dark. Drumming, throat singing, and storytelling were practiced late into the night, sustaining spirits as much as bodies. Children drifted to sleep, listening to tales of raven, of hunters, of spirits that shaped the world. Night was a time of imagination, when even the howling winds seemed to whisper stories across every region. Though the landscapes and customs varied, one truth held steady: the night was never empty. It was alive with meaning, with danger and safety, with silence and song. It was a time when the visible world softened and the invisible became clear. Whether beneath the wide skies of the plains, the stars of the desert, the shadows of the forest, or the endless dark of the Arctic. Native peoples embraced the night as part of the sacred cycle of existence. The night, though shrouded in darkness, was not always a time of sleep alone. For many native peoples, it was also the hour of labor, of travel, of medicine, and of communion with the unseen. Across the varied landscapes of North America, the cloak of night offered opportunities and necessities that daylight did not. And those who lived closest to the rhythms of the land understood the gifts and challenges of the darkness. Among hunters, the night often brought quiet movement through the land. Deer, elk, and other creatures ventured cautiously to streams or meadows under the cover of moonlight, their silhouettes shifting against the silver glow. Skilled hunters used this to their advantage, learning to move with silence so complete that even the snapping of a twig could betray them. They studied the wind, listened for the faintest sound, and relied on their knowledge of animal tracks and habits. For some tribes, night hunting was not merely about food, but also about ritual and acknowledgement of the life taken with prayers, whispered into the darkness before and after. Travelers, too, embraced the night, especially across open plains and deserts where the heat of the day was punishing. By following the stars, they navigated with precision, reading constellations as one might read a map. The North Star guided many, but specific constellations also served as seasonal indicators, telling when to move camps, when to plant, when the great herds might return. To walk beneath the stars was to walk in the presence of ancestors, for the night sky was often seen as a reflection of the human world. Families might point out where their relatives had gone, their spirits twinkling above as reminders of connection that transcended time. But if night was a time of guidance, it was also the domain of danger. Predators prowled in the dark, and the unseen always carried the weight of the unknown. Wolves, cougars, and bears moved more freely at night, their presence signaled by distant calls or sudden rustling in the brush. Fires served as protection, a circle of light to keep danger at bay. Yet even these predators were treated with respect. They were not simply beasts to fear, but relatives with their own power and spirit. Their movements at night were reminders that humans were not the only ones to claim the land after the sun had set. Within the villages, healers often worked most powerfully after dark. Medicine people, shamans, and spiritual leaders drew upon the stillness of night to perform ceremonies that sought balance and health. The absence of sunlight made it easier to enter a state of focus, to call upon spirits, or to guide a patient through visions. Herbs were burned, songs were sung, and prayers were offered, their sounds rising with the smoke into the unseen world. In many traditions, illness was understood not only as a physical ailment, but also as a disruption of harmony. And the night provided the quiet space in which to restore that harmony. Dreams, too, were considered medicine. The hours of sleep were not simply rest, but journeys into another realm, where guidance and warnings could be received. Children were often encouraged to share their dreams in the morning, and elders would interpret their meanings. A dream of an animal might signify a new relationship with a spirit helper. A dream of water might foretell change. In this way, the night became a teacher, one whose lessons arrived in the silence of slumber. For warriors, the night was both ally and adversary. In times of conflict, raids were often planned for the hours before dawn, when enemies were most vulnerable. The darkness provided cover, but it also tested courage. To move silently through another tribe's territory required skill and discipline. Every shadow a potential threat, every sound a possible alarm. Songs and prayers were often whispered before such journeys, calling for protection and clarity. The night was unpredictable, and those who stepped into it carried both bravery and reverence. Yet despite its dangers, the night was also a realm of beauty and intimacy. Lovers often found their moments in the quiet hours, slipping away from the watchful eyes of family to meet beneath the stars. The moon itself was seen as a companion, a silent witness to human connection. Among some tribes, lunar cycles guided not only ceremonies, but also relationships, with the full moon seen as a time of heightened emotion and power. To sit with another beneath the glow of moonlight was to share a secret bond with the cosmos itself. Children, meanwhile, experienced the night as both wonder and mystery. The flickering of firelight created stories in the shadows, faces and animals, dancing along lodge walls. Laughter and whispers filled the air as they tried to stay awake through stories told by grandparents. Their eyelids growing heavy, but their imaginations still alive. The night belonged to them in a way that was both magical and formative. It was when they learned who they were, where they came from, and how they fit into the great cycle of life in the Arctic. When nights could last for months, survival itself was bound to the darkness. Families organized their routines around conserving heat and energy. Children played quiet games within igloos, carving small figures or practicing skills with miniature tools. Adults worked on clothing, repairing parkas and boots, or carving tools from bone and ivory. The long nights were not empty stretches of time, but opportunities to prepare, to create, and to pass down knowledge. Songs and throat singing echoed through the dark, their rhythmic sounds keeping spirits alive, even when the outside world offered nothing but wind and ice dotting the deserts. Nights brought ceremonies of renewal. Dancers painted with intricate designs moved in rhythm to drums, their footsteps sending vibrations into the earth. Fires illuminated the walls of canyons, turning them into living canvases of light and shadow. Spirits were invited into the dance, joining the people in celebration and healing. These rituals often lasted until dawn, the participants carried by the strength of the community and the energy of the night. When the first light of morning touched the horizon, it was as if the world itself had been restored through the power of song and dance. Even in times of hardship, famine, war, or sickness, the night held a place of resilience. Families would huddle close, whispering stories of hope and remembrance, drawing strength from their ancestors. The stars above were reminders that they were not alone, that countless generations had lived, struggled, and thrived beneath the same sky. To endure the night was to be connected to a lineage of survival and spirit. The night, therefore, was never simply darkness. It was ceremony and danger, intimacy and mystery, labor and rest. It was a teacher, a healer, a guide. To understand how Native Americans spent their nights is to understand that they lived not in opposition to darkness, but in relationship with it. The night was not an absence of diet, was its complement, a sacred half of the eternal circle of time. Night across the seasons was not a singular experience, but a shifting companion. For native peoples, the rhythms of darkness were as important as the cycles of the sun, and with each change of season, the quality of night transformed. The length of shadows, the chill in the air, the songs of insects, the smell of wood smoke coal, of these painted the night in different hues. What one did after sundown in summer was not the same as what one did in the dead of winter, and communities moved in harmony with these changes in the long nights of winter, when snow blanketed the earth and the wind howled through trees or Across open plains, darkness became a canvas for survival and storytelling. Camps and villages were drawn close to the fire. Flames burned high, crackling wood filling the silence. Smoke curled upward, caught in the rafters of lodges or drifting through openings in the roofs of longhouses. Winter nights were when oral tradition thrived. Elders spoke with deliberate patience, their words weaving together tales of creation, trickster beings, ancestors, and the origins of the world. For children, these stories were entertainment, but for adults, they were lessons, moral guides, encoded in narrative. Some tribes even reserved certain sacred stories only for the winter season, believing they could not be told at other times without disturbing the balance of the natural world. During these long nights, practical work continued quietly. Women tanned hides by lamplight, their hands smoothing and stretching until the material was supple and ready for clothing or shelter. Men repaired bows, arrows, or tools, ensuring they were ready when spring hunts began again. Young people were often taught skills in these hours: how to stitch moccasins, how to bead intricate designs, how to recognize the meaning of symbols passed down for generations. The cold outside made the fire all the more precious, and the warmth of shared labor turned the night into a circle of community. In contrast, summer nights carried a different energy. The heat of day often drove much of the community's work into cooler evening hours. When the sun finally dipped below the horizon, the air filled with the chirping of crickets and the distant calls of owls. Fires were smaller now, not for warmth, but for light and for keeping insects at bay. Storytelling continued, but so too did singing and drumming, their rhythms carrying across valleys and rivers. Summer nights were often nights of celebration, with dances that lasted until dawn. The earth itself seemed more alive in these hours, with fireflies glowing like spirits, rivers gleaming under the moon, and constellations guiding both the wanderer and the dreamer. Fall nights were transitional. The harvest demanded long hours, and often the work extended well into the dark. Corn, beans, and squashvi, three sisters of many tribes, were gathered by hand, bundled, and stored. The glow of fires in fields and villages alike marked the season of gratitude, with ceremonies thanking the earth for its abundance. Nights after harvest were filled with feasts, songs, and offerings to ensure future fertility. The air was cooler, and with every passing night, darkness stretched longer, reminding all that winter would soon return. Spring nights brought renewal. Rivers swelled with melted snow, frogs began their chorus, and the smell of thawed earth filled the air. Many tribes held night ceremonies to welcome the return of life, dances that honored the first shoots of green, the first animals to stir from hibernation, the first flocks of birds returning north. These were nights of hope and anticipation. Young people often courted during these times, slipping away into the shadows to whisper promises beneath the stars. Communities prepared for planting, guided not only by the sun's position but also by the moon, whose cycles governed when seeds would take root best. The nights of spring were filled with both practical preparation and sacred renewal. Across all seasons, the moon itself was a central figure. Many native traditions named each full moon according to what the earth offered at that time. The strawberry moon, the harvest moon, the snow moon, each carried meaning, guiding both labor and ceremony. To look up at the moon was to read the sky as one might read a calendar, but it was also to recognize kinship. The moon was often considered a grandmother, watching over the people with gentle light. Her cycles governed the rhythm of time, teaching patience, endurance, and return. Night after night, season after season, she reminded all that life moved in circles, never in straight lines. The role of night was also deeply shaped by geography. On the Great Plains, nights were vast and open, with a dome of stars stretching in all directions, so many that the sky seemed more alive than the earth itself. Plains tribes often used these skies to anchor migrations, reading the constellations, to guide buffalo hunts or seasonal moves. In the dense forests of the northeast, by contrast, the night was thick with trees, the stars often hidden by canopy. Here, firelight defined the limits of vision, and the darkness carried a different kind of intimacy. In the southwest, desert nights were cool and vast, the air scented with sage and dust, the silence so profound that a single drumbeat could travel for miles. In the Arctic, as mentioned, nights stretched into months, and life itself was built around their endurance. These regional differences shaped not only the practical uses of night, but also its symbolism. For some, the night was a realm of spirits, protective and dangerous. For others, it was a time of freedom, when daily obligations gave way to song, dance, and connection. Yet in every place, night was not wasted time. It was purposeful, alive, and deeply connected to the cycles of earth and sky. Children grew up with an intimate awareness of these cycles. They learned not to fear the dark, but to respect it. They were taught to listen to the owls, to the coyotes, to the wind, in the trees. Night sharpened their senses, training them to recognize subtle sounds and movements. It was said that learning to walk in the dark without fear was one of the first steps toward maturity. A child who could move quietly under the moon was a child who could one day hunt, scout, or travel with skill. In this way, the night itself was a teacher, shaping the next generation. The interplay of seasons and regions gave Native American nights a remarkable richness. Far removed from the simple notion of darkness, they were chapters in the great book of life, each page illuminated by fire, stars, and moon. Whether in celebration, survival, or ceremony, the night was never empty. It was always full of sound, of story, of purpose, and of spirit. The night was not merely a backdrop, but a sacred space, a canvas on which the unseen world touched the lives of native peoples. Darkness was not something to be feared or conquered. It was a time when the spirit world moved closer to the human. This belief gave rise to ceremonies and rituals that could only be performed beneath the stars. When the fire's glow and the moon's light created a bridge between realms. For many tribes, certain prayers and songs were reserved for nighttime. The Lakota, for example, held ceremonies that invoked the powers of the star beings, known as the Wai-Ha'ila, who were believed to watch over the people from the heavens. Night was the time when these beings could hear most clearly, and so, songs of gratitude, healing, and protection were lifted skyward under the constellations. Fires burned steadily, drums beat in low rhythms, and voices rose in harmony, carrying messages beyond what the eye could see. The Navajo, too, carried deep stories of the stars. Their constellations did not always mirror those of the Greeks and Romans, but instead reflected their own sacred tales. The Milky Way, for instance, was described as a trail of holy people, a glittering path across the sky marking the journey of creation. The Big Dipper was sometimes seen as a bear, hunted eternally by 3 stars that chased it. These stories were not only explanations for the heavens, but moral lessons, teaching balance, responsibility, and respect for the cycles of life. On quiet nights, children would lie on their backs, elders pointing out each cluster of stars, connecting dots in the dark as if drawing upon an infinite canvas dot in the northeast. Among the Iroquois Confederacy, the night was often when the great feathered serpent was said to stir beneath lakes and rivers. Rituals held in darkness were believed to keep this being at bay, maintaining harmony between the world of water and the world of people. Fires by the lakeshore glowed against the surface, and offerings were cast into the water, their ripples spreading like whispered prayers. Night made these ceremonies more potent, cloaking them in mystery and amplifying their power. The Cherokee also regarded the night as essential for balance. In their cosmology, the world was divided into upper, middle, and lower realms, with night acting as a doorway between them. Ritual dances were often held long into the dark, with fire circles representing the sacred order of the universe. Men painted their bodies, women wore beads that reflected firelight, and together they moved in rhythm, stamping their feet, their shadows leaping across the earth. These dances were not for spectacle, but for survival, ensuring that crops grew. Sickness was driven away, and harmony remained within the community. Dreams, too, held special meaning in the night. For many tribes, dreams were messages from spirits or ancestors, and the quiet of darkness was the ideal time for such visions to emerge. Among the Ojibwe, the dreamcatcher became a powerful symbol, designed to filter night visions. Hung above sleeping places, it was said to trap harmful dreams in its web while letting good ones pass through. But beyond objects, entire rituals centered on dreams. Shamans often slept alone in secluded places, using the silence of the night to invite visions that would guide the people. Dreams of animals, in particular, carried weight, signaling which creatures might offer themselves in the next hunt or which dangers lay ahead. Not all rituals were large. Communal events, many were deeply personal. A warrior might step into the night alone, fasting and praying under the stars, seeking guidance before battle. A mother might sing to the moon, asking for protection over her children. An elder might sit quietly, inhaling the scent of sage or sweetgrass as the fire burned low, speaking with ancestors whose voices seemed closest when the world was still. Night gave privacy to such sacred acts, allowing them to unfold beyond the reach of daylight's busyness. One of the most striking night ceremonies came with the ghost dance of the late 19th century. Though born out of desperation during a time of immense hardship and suppression, the dance was carried out at night, its songs echoing across the plains. Participants believed that through these dances, the dead would return, the buffalo would once more fill the land, and the world would be restored to balance. While the ghost dance was later suppressed, it revealed how deeply night was tied to visions of renewal and hope. Even in times of despair, the sounds of night itself often became part of ceremony. The howl of a wolf might be interpreted as a spirit joining the song. The cry of an owl, in some traditions, was a warning, a reminder that the line between the living and the spirit world was thin. Drums and rattles were not merely instruments, but voices of the earth, their echoes blending with natural sounds until the entire night seemed alive with rhythm. Those who sat in such ceremonies often described feeling as though the firelight carved out a small island in a vast sea of darkness, where everything seen and unseen came together in harmony. And then there were the stars themselves. Too many. Native peoples, the constellations were not distant but immediate, living relatives who shaped the destiny of those below. The Lakota told of Ti at Akar, the spirit of the buffalo, tied to the stars in such a way that when the constellation rose or set, It marked the rhythms of the buffalo herds. The Pawnee placed such importance on the stars that their villages were often oriented to align with certain constellations, ensuring that daily life mirrored the order of the heavens. Night was thus not random, it was structured, deliberate. A living map that connected sky, earth, and people. Among many tribes, young people undertook vision quests that began at night. Alone, with little more than a blanket and prayer, they sat on high ridges or in secluded groves, waiting through hours of darkness for a vision to come. It was said that the spirits spoke most clearly in the silence before dawn, and so the night became a test of endurance, patience, and faith. When the first rays of sunlight finally broke across the horizon, those who endured carried with them a new understanding of their place in the world. The sacredness of night also revealed itself in healing rituals. Some ceremonies required herbs to be gathered only under moonlight, when their spiritual potency was strongest. Others demanded that the healer sing certain songs in the deep of night, when the veil between worlds was thinnest. Patients were often treated in darkened lodges, with the flicker of firelight casting shifting patterns across walls, creating an environment where the ordinary dissolved into the sacred dot. To sit in such a lodge at night was to feel suspended between worlds, shadows lengthened, smoke curled like spirits in the air, and chants rose and fell like waves. Those present would often say that the healing was not done by the person, but by the night itself, by the spirits who gathered in the darkness, by the ancestors who leaned close, by the moon and stars that shone as silent witnesses in awe of. This night was never passive. It was not simply the absence of the sun, but a presence in its own right filled with power, memory, and mystery. To live within its rhythms was to be constantly reminded that the world was more than what could be seen, that beneath every shadow and beyond every star lay connections that bound people, animals, earth, and spirit together in a single web of life. As the centuries unfolded, night continued to be the quiet stage upon which Native American life was expressed, redefined, and remembered. Each generation inherited not only the rhythms of daily survival, but also the spiritual and cultural weight of evenings spent under the stars, around the fire, or within the stillness of moonlit forests. To speak of how Native Americans spent their nights is to trace how communities passed wisdom across time, ensuring that the night remained a living teacher. Storytelling was perhaps the most enduring form of this nightly inheritance. When the sun dipped below the horizon and the day's work had ended, stories emerged to fill the darkness. Elders held the responsibility of keeping traditions alive, and night was their most faithful companion in this task. By firelight, they recalled the journeys of creation, the deeds of trickster figures, the courage of warriors, and the lessons of animals. Each tale was told with purpose, sometimes to amuse, sometimes to instruct, always to preserve. For the Lakota, stories of Iktomi, the spider trickster, came alive after dark. His foolishness and cleverness alike served as lessons for listeners, warning them against pride or selfishness. Laughter often rang out in the night as children delighted in Iktomi's antics. Yet beneath the humor lay deeper truths about the balance of life. Such storytelling was never idle entertainment. It was a way of binding generations together, of keeping the cultural thread unbroken. Among the Inuit of the far north, long nights stretched for months during winter. In this vast darkness, storytelling became a lifeline, a way to survive not only the physical cold, but also the loneliness of endless night. Stories of spirits that roamed the Arctic, of hunters who transformed into animals, and of the northern lights themselves filled the igloos with warmth. The flicker of a small oil lamp would illuminate the storyteller's face, and the audience, young and old, would lean closer, their breath misting in the frozen air, their imaginations carrying them beyond the isolation of the tundra. In the pueblos of the Southwest, nights were marked by the telling of Kushina stories, sacred tales of spiritual beings who mediated between humans and the divine. These stories could not be told in daylight. They belonged to the night, when spirits were most attentive, and when children could hear the lessons without distraction. The darkness provided not only privacy, but also a sacred atmosphere, reminding everyone present that the act of storytelling was itself a ritual. The rhythm of storytelling mirrored the rhythm of the fire. Sparks rose as voices rose. Flames sank as voices softened. The night became a partner in this act, lending mystery to every tale. The shadows cast upon faces made. Expressions seemed larger, gestures more profound. And when silence fell at the end of a story, it was the silence of the night itself that completed the lesson. Pressing it gently into memory. Songs, too, served as vessels of legacy during the night. Songs remembered battles, migrations, or the births of rivers. Others were lullabies, sung by mothers to soothe children into dreams, each note carrying the comfort of continuity. Nighttime was the moment when song could linger without interruption, when even the trees seemed to lean closer to listen. In the absence of written records, these songs, sung again and again across generations, became archives of history. Ceremonies reinforced this legacy as well. Some dances, like the Iroquois midwinter ceremony, were explicitly tied to cycles of night and dawn, marking renewal at the turning of the year. Others, such as the Plains tribes' Sundance preparations, required night vigils, where participants purified themselves in anticipation of day. Each night vigil carried the weight of continuity. What was done under the stars was not only for the present, but for the generations yet to come. But the night was also a time when memory was guarded against loss. During the era of forced removals, when native peoples were driven from ancestral lands and their traditions outlawed, the night became a refuge for culture. By darkness, songs forbidden by colonizers were still sung. Stories forbidden in schools were still told in whispers around small fires. Ceremonies suppressed by law continued in hidden groves, with the night itself acting as a shield. The moon bore silent witness as native peoples clung to the essence of their identity. Even as the daylight world tried to erase it, this quiet resistance is part of why night holds such layered meaning. It was not only a time of rest and ritual, but also of survival and preservation. While daylight brought the watchful eyes of outsiders, night gave cover for people to remain themselves. And so, night became more than a time of connection to spirits. It became a time of connection to one's own threatened humanity. Dreams, as ever, carried this continuity forward. A child who dreamt of an eagle might be told they carried a special destiny, and that destiny would shape not only their life, but also the life of the community. A shaman who dreamt of ancestors might pass on messages that changed how rituals were practiced. Dreams ensured that knowledge was never static, but always alive, always responding to the needs of the people. Night allowed this fluidity of memory, creating a space where new meanings could be woven into the fabric of tradition. And so, night became a teacher in itself. Just as the stars marked the passage of seasons and guided migrations, so too did the cycles of storytelling, ceremony, and resistance mark the passage of culture. Each evening, when fires were lit, or when the moon rose over forests and plains, native peoples stepped into continuity with those who came before them. The night, eternal and patient, held their stories as carefully as it held the stars. As the night carried on in Native American villages, camps, and homelands, it was never seen as something separate from life, but rather as an inseparable rhythm of existence. The day provided sustenance, labor, and visible connection to the land, but the night offered reflection, continuity, and intimacy with both the spiritual and the human. To spend the night in these worlds was to understand that identity itself was tied not only to the earth beneath one's feet, but to the stars above one's head, in the vast open plains. The silence of night stretched far beyond the horizon. A rider could sit quietly with their horse and hear almost nothing but the faint rustling of the grasses. That silence was never emptiness. It was a kind of fullness, an awareness that the earth itself breathed beneath the cover of darkness. For the Lakota, the stars formed the sacred hoop, mirroring the circle of life below. Looking up into the constellations, people could see not only the patterns of animals, but also the path their ancestors had walked. The night sky was a reflection of the community itself, teaching that identity was not limited to the living, but extended across generations. All bound by starlight dot in the forests of the northeast, night was alive with sound. Crickets hummed, owls hooted, frogs croaked, and the rustle of leaves carried messages unseen. For the Iroquois and Algonquin peoples, these sounds were not distractions, but reminders that humans shared the world with countless other lives. Night brought humans into the chorus of existence, where every sound had its place. Sitting in longhouses, with the fire glowing at the center, families listened not only to elders' voices, but also to the music of the world outside. The forest at night reminded them of kinship with trees, with rivers, with animals. Identity was communal not only among people, but also with all beings who shared the night dot in the desert southwest. Nights revealed an entirely different character. The air, hot and relentless by day, turned cool and forgiving after sunset. Stars flooded the heavens with clarity unlike anywhere else. Pueblo peoples, Hopi, Zuni, and Navajo alike, lifted their eyes to those skies and traced the patterns of constellations that told their own stories. The Navajo recognized the Milky Way as the path laid down by the trickster coyote, scattering crystals across the sky. These constellations were not remote, they shaped ceremony, guided agriculture, and explained life's mysteries. Night in the desert was a teacher as much as any elder, its lessons etched in starlight. It was also in these night hours that the delicate threads of resilience were woven. For Native Americans enduring the pressures of colonization, night became both a retreat and a defiance. By the warmth of hidden fires, languages outlawed in schools were still spoken. Songs forbidden by missionaries were still sung. Ceremonies, driven underground, emerged in the darkness, unseen but unbroken. The night gave cover for a culture that refused to vanish. For every attempt at erasure, the stars remained as allies, reminding people that no matter how much the daylight world changed, the night sky was the same sky their ancestors had watched. Consider the way in which night deepened human bonds. Families gathered in ways that daylight could not always allow. After labor was finished, after fields were tended, after hunting was done, night brought people together in circles of kin, of neighbors, of storytellers. Within those circles, laughter mingled with quiet listening, and children drifted. to sleep with stories still echoing in their ears. The bonds formed in these hours carried forward into adulthood, shaping how individuals saw themselves as part of something larger. Night was also a time of private reflection for warriors, hunters, or young men on vision quests. Nights alone could stretch endlessly, filled with the testing silence of solitude. Yet that silence was understood as a companion. It was in the stillness of night that visions came most strongly, that the cries of animals spoke clearest, that the heart learned patience. To endure a night alone was to discover strength within oneself, but also to recognize that one was never truly alone. Spirits, ancestors, and the living world were always present. Dreams, again, carried this intimate connection forward. Dreams were not isolated events, but living bridges between self and community, self and world. When a child dreamt of a bear, the dream might shape their path in life, perhaps marking them as one called to strength or healing. When a leader dreamt of storms, it might be understood as a message to guide the tribe in difficult times. Night made such dreams possible, ensuring that guidance flowed continually from the unseen. There is also a tenderness in the way night was experienced. In some tribes, lullabies were sung not only to soothe children, but also to weave them into the continuity of culture. A Lakota lullaby might carry a prayer for strength. A Navajo lullaby might weave imagery of the stars and the sacred for directions. These gentle songs ensured that even the youngest heard the language of their people and learned their place within it. Night thus became the first teacher of infants, and the lullabies of mothers echoed across generations. The endurance of these night traditions shows that darkness was never simply the absence of light. For Native Americans, night was a fullness full of presence, full of spirit, full of connection. Where some cultures feared the dark as threatening, Native traditions embraced it as nurturing. The firelight that cast shadows on faces was not meant to drive the night away, but to join with it. The night was not an enemy to be defeated. It was a companion to be welcomed. Even in times of sorrow, night offered solace. After loss, communities often held vigils that stretched deep into darkness, with prayers whispered to ancestors and songs carrying grief into the sky. The stars bore witness to mourning, and the moon shone gently upon those who wept. Night held both joy and pain with equal patience, teaching that life itself was a balance of both. To understand how Native Americans spent their nights, then, is to recognize how much of their identity was shaped in those hours. The night was where memory endured, where resilience strengthened, where bonds deepened, and where the spiritual world remained close. If the day built the body, the night built the soul. And in building the soul, it built the community that could endure across centuries. As the hours of night stretched toward dawn, the rhythm of life shifted gently but with meaning. For many Native communities, the last portion of the night was not a dead time, but a bridge between worlds. In these hours, the fire burned lower, voices softened, and the world seemed to rest in anticipation of the sun's return. Yet even then, the night continued to teach. Among the plains peoples, these quiet hours before sunrise were sacred for prayer. Some rose early to offer tobacco to the four directions, facing the east in expectation of the first light. The stars still shone above, yet the horizon carried a faint silver glow. It was in this space between night and day that people felt closest to the Creator, offering gratitude for survival through the darkness and hope for what the daylight would bring. The night did not end abruptly, but passed its wisdom into the day, creating a seamless continuity. For others, These hours marked a return from vigil. Young men who had gone alone into the wilderness for vision quests often spent long nights fasting, praying, and waiting for guidance. By the final night, their strength was tested, and their spirits sharpened by the silence and the vastness around them. To greet the dawn after such nights was to step into a new identity, one shaped by dreams, by struggle, and by the companionship of the unseen. The night, therefore, was not a void to be endured, but an initiator, a guide into adulthood, wisdom, or responsibility in longhouses of the Haudenosaunee or the wigwams of Algonquin peoples. The last hours of night were often filled with soft rest. Mothers kept their children close, elders stirred in their blankets, and the coals of the fire glowed like tiny stars on the ground. The world outside was still. Active animals foraged, owls hunted, wind sighed through trees, but inside, families were wrapped in warmth. In that warmth lay an intimacy unique to night, the feeling that within those walls, life was protected. To awaken in such surroundings was to feel connected to every member of the household, bound together by the shared night. In the desert southwest, nights lingered long and cool before the punishing heat of day. The Navajo often said prayers at dawn as part of the blessing way, aligning themselves with harmony in the world. But the night that preceded those prayers was equally important, for it was filled with stars that reminded the people of the order and balance of the cosmos. To watch the sky throughout the night was to read the stories of creation, to see the actions of spirits written across the heavens. The night was not a passive backdrop, it was an active manuscript of belief, guiding the people in how to live. Even the simple act of traveling at night carried profound meaning. For some tribes, the cool darkness made long journeys bearable in ways the day's heat could not. Travelers walked by starlight or moonlight, their feet sure on familiar trails. To journey at night was to trust the land, to know its contours, so well that even in shadows it revealed itself. Such journeys often carried a sense of companionship with ancestors, as though each step was echoed by those who had walked the path before. The night turned the land into memory, and memory into guidance. As colonization pressed upon native peoples, night often became a time of secrecy and quiet resilience. When ceremonies were forbidden by law, they still happened by the fireside, far from prying eyes. When languages were suppressed, they were whispered at night to children who needed to carry them forward. The very act of speaking one's mother tongue under cover of darkness was a form of resistance, a refusal to let the thread of identity be severed. The night became a shield, a place where culture could survive intact even when daylight brought oppression. For elders, night was also a time of continuity. Stories told at night were not only entertainment, they were survival. Each tale remembered was a seed planted, one that could take root in younger minds. The telling was often deliberate, filled with care, so that children could hear not only the words, but the weight of meaning. And when children later retold these stories to their own descendants, the night became eternal, stretching across centuries. The moon itself was a teacher in these traditions. Many tribes followed lunar cycles to mark time, plant crops, and celebrate ceremonies. Each phase of the moon carried meaning: the new moon for beginnings, the full moon for completion, the waning for letting go. Nights were measured by the moon's journey, and lives followed its rhythm. Watching the moon glide across the night sky, communities were reminded that life itself was a cycle, one of renewal and return. Dreams in the final hours of night also carried power. A hunter dreaming of animals might wake with insight into the next day's pursuit. A healer dreaming of herbs might recognize a plant newly useful. A leader dreaming of conflict might see warnings for the tribe. Night thus continued to guide, even as it surrendered to morning. And yet, despite all the depth and sacredness, night was also simple and human. Children slept peacefully beside parents. Couples whispered softly to each other before drifting off. Dogs curled near the fires for warmth. These small, tender moments were as much a part of the night as grand ceremonies. They spoke of love, security, and everyday life. They reminded people that the strength of culture lay not only in rituals, but also in the quiet continuities of family. Night in Native America was, in its essence, a mirror of life itself, complex, rich, filled with beauty, challenge, resilience, and tenderness. To dwell in that world after sunset was to see existence in its wholeness, with nothing left out. The stars, the fire, the stories, the songs, the dreams. The silent soul of it wove together into a tapestry that did not end when the sun rose. Instead, the night shaped the dawn, teaching each new day what it meant to live in balance with the world. The endurance of these night traditions, even through centuries of struggle, shows their power. Darkness was never feared as an enemy. It was embraced as a friend. In the night, one was never alone. Ancestors, spirits, animals, and the earth itself remained present, always listening, always guiding. And for those who lived in that bond, the night was never simply an interval between days. It was life itself, unfolding in its most profound form. As dawn began to whisper across the horizon, the last embers of the night still glowed within native villages, camps, and homes. The fire, which had carried families through the hours of darkness, softened into pale coals, like stars sinking. Into the earth, shadows lifted, shapes grew clearer, and the natural world prepared for its shift into daylight. Yet, for the people, this moment was never simply about the end of the night. It was about recognizing how the night itself had prepared them for the day. The quiet of night had been a time for communion with family, with ancestors, with spirits, with the earth. It had been a classroom of stories, where lessons were not written in books, but spoken in voices, passed from tongue to ear, echoing across generations. The night had been a refuge, where struggles of the day could be set aside, if only for a few hours, and where the bonds of kinship were strengthened in shared silence and song. It had been a sacred arena, where prayers rose like smoke toward the stars, and where visions arrived in the space between sleep and wakefulness. As the first birds sang, native peoples understood that the night had given them much more than rest. It had given renewal. It had given guidance. It had given a sense of balance. Without the night, the day would not carry the same weight. Without the dreams, the stories, and the stillness, there could be no action, no work, no purpose. Once the sun returned, the cycle was complete because the night had played its part with dignity. Different communities expressed this transition in different ways. In the woodlands, some families greeted the sunrise with songs or gestures of gratitude, acknowledging that the night had safely passed. In the open plains, riders might already be saddling their horses by first light, their strength sharpened by the stories and songs of the evening before. In the desert, the night's cool relief lingered in memory as the heat began to stir. And in the forests of the far north, where winter nights stretched endlessly, the transition into day was almost imperceptible, yet still carried the same spiritual importance. But across all these lands, the meaning remained consistent. Night was never wasted. It was never empty. It was never something to hurry through or ignore. Instead, it was a teacher as essential as the daylight itself. For many elders, this understanding became the foundation of wisdom. They reminded the young that life itself was a cycle of nights and days, of darkness and light. Struggles, like night, could feel long and heavy, but they carried lessons within them. Joys, like day, could feel bright and fleeting, but they needed the night's grounding to truly be appreciated. To live well meant to honor both, to see them not as opposites, but as companions. The night was not the end. It was part of a whole. Dreams continued to serve as bridges between these realms. Children might wake and tell their families of the creatures they saw in their sleep, and parents listened carefully, guiding them to understand meaning. Hunters might rise from their beds, recalling the sound of hooves or wings, taking it as a sign of where to seek food. Healers might wake with clarity about which herbs to use, feeling the night had offered them direct instruction. In this way, the night lived on within the day, carried forward like an invisible thread. The stars, too, lingered in memory even as they faded. Each constellation told a story, and each story held guidance. Even when the sun outshone them, the people knew the stars were still there, still watching, still reminding them of their place in the greater cosmos. The night sky was not gone with dawn, it was simply resting, much like the people themselves had done during the darkness in later centuries. As the modern world pushed forward, these traditions faced challenges. Artificial lights began to wash out the stars, cities grew, and the rhythms of day and night changed under new ways of living. Yet for many native communities, the memory of night remained strong. Even in modern times, ceremonies are still timed to the phases of the moon, songs are still sung by firelight, and prayers still rise in the pre-dawn hours. The heart of the night endures, carrying wisdom across generations. And for those who listen closely, night continues to speak. Step away from the noise, step into the quiet, and its voice returns. It tells us that darkness is not to be feared. It tells us that stillness has value. It tells us that dreams matter, that memory matters, that balance is essential. It tells us that even when the world feels heavy, there is guidance in the silence, there is companionship in the shadows, and there is renewal waiting on the other side of struggle. For native peoples, this was always known. The night was a partner, not a stranger. It was a cycle, not an interruption. It was life in its deepest form. And when dawn came, it was not the defeat of night, but its completion, its fulfillment. Day and night shook hands, and together they made the circle of life whole. As the last fire in the village dimmed, as the first rays of sun lit the land, families rose with gratitude. Children stretched and laughed, elders nodded with quiet knowing. Hunters prepared, mothers sang softly to their babies. The world stirred again, but within every breath of that morning lived the memory of the night just past, a reminder that darkness had its own gifts. So when you imagine Native Americans spending their nights, picture more than just sleep. Picture families huddled in warmth, listening to tales that stretch back to the beginning of time. Picture elders speaking wisdom by firelight, their faces illuminated in the glow of embers. Picture young men gazing at stars, seeking visions. Picture women weaving, mothers singing, hunters dreaming. Picture ceremonies rising into the starlit sky, the rhythm of drums echoing into the stillness. Picture the land itself, alive with sound, the cry of an owl, the rush of wind, the whisper of grass, and most of all, picture the sense of connection. Connection to family, to ancestors, to the land, to the universe itself. In the night, nothing was separate. All was woven together in a great fabric of existence. That was the gift of night. That was its meaning. Even now, as we sit in our own nights sometimes, surrounded by silence, sometimes weighed down by our thoughts, we can look to these traditions for guidance. We can learn to honor the dark as much as the light, to find meaning in stillness, to see the stars as reminders of continuity. We can learn that nights are not empty hours, but essential spaces for renewal, reflection, and connection. And so, as the native peoples of the past once did, we too can whisper gratitude to the night. Gratitude for its shelter, for its wisdom, for its dreams. Gratitude for the ancestors who lived by its lessons and for the stories that still carry those lessons forward. Gratitude for the eternal cycle of day and night, light and dark, joy and struggle, rest and action. The night does not vanish when the sun rises. It simply steps back, waiting patiently, promising to return. And when it does, it brings with it the same gifts it has always carried: the stars, the dreams, the songs, the silence. In that sense, night is eternal. It was eternal for the Native Americans who lived in its embrace, and it is eternal for us, too. All we have to do is listen.